Today we're going to be exploring project management and project development. We're thinking about robotics and how to impact the future. What are our roles as researchers? How do we work with companies, with industry, with government? And there are so many different career paths that one can follow. So today our talk is led by Brad Eiben, and he's teaching here at Carnegie Mellon University, and he's going to help us walk through and have some conversations about project management and project development as it relates to robotics and the broader technology field. So welcome everyone, thank you for joining us, and we'll kick off here.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. And as an aside, I am also, in addition to teaching, I'm also the director of the MS in Product Management program here at CMU. And it's kind of like the only MS in Product Management that really exists. So it's unique, and it takes advantage of the blend of things that CMU does particularly well, which is computer science, design, and business. So that's kind of the premise, but this presentation is not necessarily about the program. It's more about the idea of understanding what product management is. And I'm going to share my screen in 1 second here. Okay, thank you. Hi, we have the video on. I'll share the screen so that we can get into the presentation itself. And for those who are online, it could be relevant to know that we have a few people in the room, and I'll be interacting with them as kind of a proxy for those who are online, asking questions, discussing some things. And we'll go through and discuss several aspects of product management. It's really an interesting field. It's an interesting discipline. And I hope that there are some important things that we take away from this today. For starters, this is an interesting quote. This quote, "Product management is the roadmap to CEO," was given at a presentation here on campus about 200 yards away last year. This is from Jeffrey Moore, who's one of the more famous authors on product marketing and product development. He's considered one of the founders of the type of thinking, author of Crossing the Chasm and several other books. But this statement in and of itself indicates how important a product manager is to their organization and the types of skills that are necessary and how translatable they are. And we'll get into that. But as we get started, it's important to know why you should care about this presentation, why you should care about product management, or at least be aware of it. So we talked a little bit about this in pre-session chatter, but what companies do we think about when we think about product-centered organizations? Bang, yeah. Excellent. It's almost as if I have a slide on that next. Any others? Any others come to mind?
Apple, DJI.
Apple, yes. Yeah, those are the common responses, right? Like, and when you think of the word Apple, even you think of your iPhone or your MacBook, or in the design of it and the aura of it, for lack of a better way to put it. And then same for the rest of these companies. The interesting aspect, though, is that they're just the pioneers. They're the tip of the iceberg. Like, this slide shows just where our recent grads have started their jobs. And this is like only a small subsection of companies that are realizing that the product is what attracts the customer. You might have technology, but if you don't have it packaged into a usable interface, into a way that a customer can enjoy using it, then they don't care that much. So the idea, like, for example, in my role on a very frequent basis, I talk with executives at companies that are looking to hire people or looking to start training programs, whatever it might be. And They are like banks, insurance companies, things that you wouldn't think, entities and industries that you wouldn't think of as product oriented. Like when you think of insurance, you think of advertisements and mascots. You don't think of like, did they build something that I enjoy using, that I want to use, that I would choose company A over company B, specifically because they made it easier, or they provided some value that nobody else provides, and really understands me and connects with me. So, and that's what drives growth and drives users and drives additional offerings and all these things. So companies across industries are coming to this realization and transforming their entire organizational structures to adapt to a product first, as opposed to maybe engineering first or technology first mindset. The product, this is like, to me, this is the slide that if you walk away from here not remembering much of anything else, like understanding that product management might be an option for you as a career. The work itself, it's challenging, it's innovative, it's impactful. Like you directly affect many people's lives, ideally in a positive and ethical way. Like we've done projects, our students have done projects for like Home Depot, and you can type up Home Depot's website right now and see their project results on the front homepage, and then walk into the store and see the results of it.
Question, in the previous slide, you said that like companies are moving now
Yeah.
into more product focused, in fact, outcome, right? Does that mean that before they weren't product, they were more?
Right. So for those online, the question was, did my previous slide imply that companies did not focus on product previously? And that is a correct statement. Like a lot of the old type of thinking, or the older type of thinking, was we have a technology, we can build this thing, and then we'll find somebody who wants it. Instead of like the technology was the feature, or the engineering was the feature, and then they try to wrap a package around it and sell it. Whereas instead, product thinking is more like, what is the goal that our customer is trying to accomplish? And then can we use technology to solve it? So I think that maybe 2 slides from now, I have an example where I'll sort of show that type of thinking, from both perspectives too. It's a good question. But yeah, there's very few roles. Another question?
Yeah. I was wondering what exactly your definition is of products. Because something I think of when you mentioned like Apple is like how it's like the experience of like opening that.
Yeah.
Same thing with kind of Disney, but Disney is very, like if you go to like the theme parks, it's like very experience oriented. You're not getting like a specific product. So like what exactly, how broad is it?
No, that's a great question. That's such a great question, because I was concerned that it might be confusing as I was preparing this. So when in the context of this discussion, when I use the word product, I'm talking about several things, but more specifically one. So I'm talking about the digital product itself, the application, the website. Those things are products. But then there's also the service. Like Disney's an excellent example. And something like DoorDash might be a good example too, where you have an app that's DoorDash, but the DoorDash experience happens with the delivery driver, and it happens at the restaurant, and it happens with the communication that's way outside your hands, and how fast you expect to get your food, all these things. So in the context of today's discussion, I'm going to call product the broader product. So it includes services, it includes FastPass at Disney. It includes these things that are designed to make the experience, the overall experience, centered on the user, better. And most of today's discussion will also be related to the software side, the digital side, as opposed to like the iPhone itself. But they're all in the broader context. It's a great question. So the other reason why product management might be interesting, it's one of the more well-paying jobs in tech, mostly because it has such high levels of responsibility. It's a fringe benefit. I like for people to focus more on these than this, but nonetheless, it is a very attractive, lots of perks to the role. And like I mentioned earlier, lots of upward mobility as well. So this kind of ties into the previous question, what is a product? This presentation, I view this presentation as a product, and you are my users. So this presentation, if it doesn't accomplish goals for you, was not a successful product. With that in mind, I'm really curious, and I'm going to, for those who are online and those who watch the video later, I'm going to use the students that are in the classroom as the proxy for everybody else. But I'm just curious, like, what are your general, you showed up here voluntarily, we discussed that. What are your goals? What are you hoping to get out of the discussion today?
I basically want to learn more about product management. My father he used to be a project manager.
Okay.
And then he also moved up the corporate ladder, but I'm interested in seeing different aspects of that. He worked at like an electrical company, but I know there's a lot more areas of product management.
Yeah. So learn basics about product management, especially maybe in relation to other roles in teams and companies.
My parents, everyone in my family kind of have their own company, and like I am a software person.
Yeah.
But I do believe my soft skills are way better than my tech skills by like a massive amount. So I was hoping to see it apply into the MS.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah. So understanding whether your skills might be a fit for the role, that type of thing. And that was a good intro right there.
I'm going to add to this as well. The conversation today about product management, product development, these are new for us. As you said, there's been a shift.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that this will ignite some conversations and insight.
Yeah, conversation in a general sense and insights.
I kind of want to know how much, like, say, like the tech part intersects with the product management part. Just kind of where the lines, like how much of it is management, how much of it is like technology.
Okay. So sort of, is it fair to say something that looks like a day in the life of a PM kind of thing? Yeah, great. And for the record, I'm asking these questions because I'm totally prepared and content to go way off script if you have different questions than I have prepared. So far, it's almost like I fed you these questions, but
There's been a shift, right?
Yeah.
We used to do something this way, and now there's a change. With that change, does that mean that the definition or the role of the project manager has also, and the profile has changed as well? And that might be interesting to get insight into. Are you finding that it's becoming more technical, less technical, kind of along that line there?
Okay.
You know, what's going along with that role? How is that role adjusting to this change as well?
Okay. I will come back. So those that are related to like what exactly does a PM do? There's a section on that, and I think that considering that there's specific interest in that, I might not go deep enough into it. So if I go through anything too fast, pause me and ask questions. Like to me, this is a conversation, not a lecture, not a sales pitch, nothing like that. It's like, let's make sure that we're clear on those things that you want to walk away with because they're important. Great, that's a great start because as we get to the next few slides, you'll see that those were most of my guesses. Just for the sake of establishing who we're working with, is everybody in the room undergrad?
Yeah.
Okay. Undergrad, interested in technical. You mentioned software, electrical engineer.
Mechanical engineering. Yeah.
That's what I was. Okay, so we have different disciplines of engineering, technical fields. That's good. And undergrad age. So that's really what this is tailored to. And kind of like those initial questions started with, I made the assumption that people's understanding of product management is low. We'll start from a foundational point in discussion. So as we already did the let's talk about you part. So the goal that I assumed is basic understanding of what PMs do, and why would that be an important goal? To understand the skills required. I think that's the order that we got the hands raised as well. And why is that important? To understand whether it might be right for you. And why is that important? It's a path toward a really good job. If it's the type of job like soft skills, like you mentioned, where they're so critical, if you have the technical and the soft skills, and if, like, dare I say, if you're easily bored by things, like I hate doing the same thing day after day after day. So every day, like this is a different day than yesterday was, and every day that I do this thing, because back to the what is a product question, I view the MS in product management program as a product. It delivers something to the students, it delivers something to their employers. And it is, if we don't look at it as such, and in such a way that we have to assess whether it's doing the job that it's designed to do, and measure that and make continuous improvements. And that's kind of like why we're going through the goals for the presentation itself too, because if I'm off target, then it's wasting all of our time. So let's adjust. Assume goals as well. You probably want something that's memorable. If I could have done this both online and in person without PowerPoint, I would have. But I think for the hybrid, this is the method that works. You've probably seen way more than enough PowerPoints in this summer. Bonus goal. And this one, like, even if you say product management is not interesting to me at all, we're going to walk through problem-solving methodology and some quick activities. We're going to go through quickly, very quickly. In fact, like I have a half semester course that's kind of condensed down into 30 minutes in the packaged in here. But I hope that the activities sort of help you to visualize and maybe solidify, anchor some of the concepts that we'll talk about, because they're so important, not just to product management, but to anyone on a product team. Anyone on a product team that understands product management is automatically a better team member. But again, these are like life problem-solving methodologies. They're not just product problem-solving methodologies. So with that in mind, this quote from an ancient warrior, sword fighter, Musashi: if you know the way broadly, you'll see it in everything. So really, you're all smart students. You're all here right now. Once you understand problem solving in a broad sense, you can apply it in any situation. And that's part of what we'll talk about today. So the first activity, for those in the room, let's just, I was considering whether to have you write them down or get together in pairs or something, but let's just shout them out. For a few minutes, what products as a student do you use? And let's use the broader definition of product. Okay. Mechanical engineering, of course. Calendar. That's an excellent one.
Yes,
Okay.
R.
Fair, yeah. Any others? Google. Yeah, like as I was thinking through this discussion, just Google stuff that you use. We could talk for like 5 minutes about. More like, let's narrow the discussion. I like that we brought things in from outside the just what's on my iPhone kind of thing. But let's go back into that a little bit. And what communication products do you use? Message, Slack,
Microsoft
Outlook,
Teams.
yeah. Like, and if you're thinking, we could probably go on and on. We're using Zoom right now and YouTube right now, and we're communicating through them. And we're using all the hardware that's associated. And you probably use Canvas, I assume, for class. Like, and one of the reasons I like to focus on that is because I think it's a problem that we all share. Is we're responsible for communicating with our professors, our staff, our peers, our work teams, whatever it might be. And we have like 20 different methods of communication. you're responsible to keep track of 20 different methods of incoming communication, and that alone is a user problem. So it's just one that we kind of get caught into this cycle of living with, that we don't even realize we're spending so much time doing this stuff. And then each of those 20 has different ways to distract you and all these things. But keep this list, keep this idea in mind, because we'll build upon it with additional activities. Okay, this is all you really need to know about what's a product manager's role. Hopefully it works. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Unfortunately, there's a lot to juggle as a product manager. Some of you may have seen this diagram in the past, but the question was, there was a question about how much tech is involved. It's and where that line is drawn. This is kind of like the go-to, the default diagram that is, there are variations of it and that kind of thing, but in a very basic sense, you're at the center of this universe that's driven by design, technology, and the business needs. The design is more customer facing, user facing. The business, if you can't make money off what you're building, then you won't last. And then the technology is kind of like a tool or a limiter, depending on whether the technology exists for what you want to do. I'll be coming back to this because we can consider this a snapshot of the world for the context of the rest of the discussion. And this is the example that I wanted to mention as it relates to the idea of engineering and then product, or product then engineering. Microsoft is also one that had, until recently, gray lines between what is a program manager and what's a product manager. But we worked on this project a couple of years ago. This is what Microsoft calls mixed reality. It's not virtual reality. You can it's more like people are familiar with Google Glasses. If you're not familiar with HoloLens, it's similar, where it displays the alternate reality alongside actual reality. So you see through it instead of like a VR headset. But this example is both the old way and the new way, where the old way was Microsoft developed this technology for mixed reality. They did it without a product in mind necessarily. They had teams that were working on it. And as a result, like they were left with the problem of, we built this thing and now we don't know who wants to use it or how they'll use it. And this is actually the HoloLens 2. And that leads to errors similar to, like, it's too heavy, or it's not comfortable, or I can't use it in a dusty environment, or those types of things, because they haven't been thinking about the job to be done. Instead, they were thinking about what's the coolest thing we can build. So that's like engineering first, product second. But HoloLens 2 is more like, let's think about the applications. And in this case, how will a surgeon use mixed reality? And let's make sure that the product and the application itself fit his needs or her needs. So that's kind of two ways to look at the same kind of situation. The way that we in the product world look at it, though, is focus on the problem, focus on the goal that your user has first, because then your design will be better and it'll be more effective, and you can potentially find more applications as a result of having that customer focus. This is another way that I typically think of product management. Is you're kind of balancing the needs and the expectations of these very different groups. And each of these arrows, in my mind, it's like a tug of war. It's like, your users want all these options, all these customizations, all these different things. They want them for free, and they want the world. Well, at the same time, your executives, your shareholders, the people that are concerned, your CFO, are concerned with what is the revenue, what is our financial health. All these things, they pull at each other, and you're there in the middle, balancing and ensuring that everybody's on the same page. And then at the same time, your team, in order to be motivated, in order to want to work with you and for you on your product, they need to understand what's important. They need to understand where status is. Why are we doing this thing? This doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain it to me? So you're looking to establish the product vision and explain why. Why is, like, to me, why is let's say the most important 3 letters in product management, understanding why. Because in the end, you're just solving a problem. And if you don't know why you're solving it, then you're not going to solve the correct problem. And then the PM has to achieve and maintain buy-in along the way with all these people, because in the real world, many people, regardless of whether they're PM or not, but they'll run into a situation where the COO said, we have to do this thing, and the PM is expected to execute it, but you need to be able to influence that COO that, well, why do you want us to do this? And have you considered that might not solve the actual problem? So there's a lot of soft skills, a lot of negotiation, a lot of chief operating officer. I just pulled that out of, like, a chief anything officer might come down and say, like, do this, and it might not be the right thing, and they don't realize that. It happens, like, it happens way more than anyone would ever care to admit. But those types of discussions, those types of soft skills, negotiations, sort of sparring with ideas are necessary as a product manager. And just go ahead.
My last semester in my HCI class, I was told about how Microsoft released for products like a while ago that, like, just ended up failing completely. The idea is that, like, I forgot what the exact product was, but they had to just recall it immediately because it's actually costing them more money after that. The question is, how then can you, like, tell what's gonna be like used?
I'll get through that through the storyline. So if I skip over or think that I addressed it and don't. So the question for those listening was, how there was an example in a class here that was related to a failed product launch. And the question was, how can a PM identify that before it happens? And I'll get through that. We'll kind of go through that process a little bit, and we'll talk about it. That's kind of the meat of the presentation itself, fortunately. So, and then, like, just as an example of how often PMs need to interact with people, how many people you might need to interact with. This is my own stakeholder map. And this is at the center here is the MSPM program. And this is only a short version of it too, by the way. But, like, the 3 inner rings are, one is students, one is administration, and one is corporate partners. And then that goes out to different types of stakeholders within those groups. And then that goes out to another tier. And I could have had another tier or 2 up on this screen, but just, like, this is part of why a PM is so critical to the success of an organization. Is all these people are depending on you to provide the direction as to why are we doing what we're doing and what are we doing next, and are we on track? So like I said, this is real world. I made this like 2 months after becoming director of this program, because I was trying to make sense of all the people that I had to interact with. And, like, it's only grown since then. But it's the real world at the same time. Like, it's when we talk about how much technical skill versus how much soft skill is necessary, most of our grads I think even on one of our recent webinars, one of our grads said 90% of the job is communication. That won't be true for everybody, and it won't be true in every company. And some companies have a much higher technical standard for their PMs than others. Especially like some of the FANGs are notorious because their interviews are more technical than others, or the average. Some companies really mostly care, can you solve an abstract problem, and can you articulate the answer and the logic behind your solution? So there's a broad variety, but in general, it's a far less technical role than engineer in most companies. It's far more. The other aspect to this, this is true, I think, of my own map. Most PMs don't have any of these people actually reporting to them. So everybody that is on your team, everybody that is working alongside you, reports to a different manager. So to get that person to work with you, you have to negotiate with the manager or motivate that person to want to work with you at the same time. And let's say you have product A and product B in the same organization. Let's say it's Microsoft or whatever. You and the next PM over may be in direct competition to use this design team for the next 3 months. And you might have to prove that your product is more viable than theirs, or find a negotiated way to double up on the resources, or when in doubt, do it yourself. So all of these things are this is I started with a very rosy picture of what PMs do and what it is, but it's not without a cost. It's a high responsibility job. It's a high workload job. It's a high stress job. And if you're frustrated by having to sell ideas to people, if you just think this is the right way to do things, they should just fall in line and do it the way I say, or you're dictatorial, or that's a recipe that maybe product management is not for you. If you have a low threshold for that, and even in my own circumstance, when I started as a mechanical engineer, I had no problem understanding that I have the answer. I know exactly what needs to be done. So why should I have to persuade anyone? I'll just go do it, and it's the right thing to do. But in a situation like this where you're juggling so many people, back to the juggling the fire thing, it's not, you can't steamroll the team. You have to bring them with you rather than push them or anything like that to be successful. And that's where those soft skills come in. And then this is what it feels like sometimes. So I talked about the role, I talked about the stakeholders, sticking with the role idea, these are just some of the teams that you'll be working with as a product manager. You could pretty much say every team, but some of these are maybe less intuitive, like legal team. If you're doing something that's contractual or something that has compliance or environmental ramifications, you need to be able to speak lawyer well enough to interact with that.
So just going off that, my question was, does that mean you can have a base knowledge of all of these things?
Ideally, yeah. That's the sort of the message here, is that you have to have enough knowledge to say, I'm going to go talk with my software engineer, understand where they stand. Talk with the hardware engineer, understand where they stand, understand how they interact with each other. Then talk to the data scientist and talk to the legal team, and then go report that to the executives. That's the and each one is going to use different jargon. Each one is going to use something different will be important to every one of those organizations. And the legal team might say, I don't care what the software team is doing. These are our rules, and then the software team. So that's where all this conversation and this back and forth comes in. That's why the soft skills are important. like I said, you don't have authority over any of them, but you do have responsibility for the end result. And really, that's making the customer and the business leaders happy in the end. So what does a product manager do? Ensure the team is working in the right direction to solve the problem, specifically the right problem, and we'll get into that. Create value for the customer and the business, and motivate the team. That's kind of the path that we've been down. This is a snapshot from a survey of a couple hundred PMs from a few years ago, but it's pretty representative of the types of tasks on any given day that a product manager might find themselves working on. The roadmap refers to kind of like the prioritized plan for feature creation, that type of thing. Like if I'm Google Docs PM, what are we going to add next, and is it the highest priority, and then what's going to come next year, and how does that integrate with products that are coming in 2 years from now, that type of thing. User stories storytelling is one of the least appreciated aspects of PM, but so very important, because back to the idea of explaining why are we doing what we're doing. If you can explain that to your team members, then like asking a software engineer to come in and work on a Saturday is a whole lot easier if they believe in the mission and they believe that there's value in their work, than if you say, well, we're just behind and we have to ship, so you got to come in on Saturday. Like just the whole approach toward bringing people together is so different in a situation like that. But you can see there are different aspects here: interviewing customers, prototyping, hiring to a lesser extent, A/B testing, revenue targets. Like it's the breadth.
The percentages are that 39% of people.
I think that's the percent of respondents who said they do this on a frequent basis. This task. Yeah. So like hiring, for example, not all PMs will be in a position to be involved in hiring decisions, or most won't have people that work for them, but these people did. This quote kind of leads into the idea of solving problems and the way that a product manager should look at the world a bit. The manager that comes up with the right solution to the wrong problem is more dangerous than the manager who comes up with the wrong solution to the right problem. So the way that I describe our program, our MSPM program, is that we are a training program for people to solve the right problem. Because if you solve the wrong one, it could be negative, even far more than it could cause far more damage than even being neutral. This is a favorite of mine, and I'm still waiting for someone to tell me why this exists. But one way to look at technology and solving the wrong problem, and I did bring visual aids. I own this, but I'll say this toothbrush, this for everyone on camera, Bluetooth toothbrush, it's excellent. This toothbrush has Bluetooth associated with it. My toothbrush has Bluetooth associated with it. I have no idea why. I've never used it. I will never use it. I bought it because it was on sale on Black Friday. So like this was not designed for me. And this might very well be an example of engineering first, product second, because who's going to go bring a phone with them into the bathroom, put toothpaste on, pick the phone up, brush their teeth? Like, I don't know how that works. I don't know how it's intended to work. I never will. But to me, it seems like, and like if someone has the answer, I'm really curious to know, but it seems like solving a problem using technology because it exists, because it's cool engineering, it's a gadget, but to solve a problem that does not exist. And that's part of what I mean by like moving from an engineering to a product focus. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe it does something I'm not aware of, and maybe it's not designed for people like me, whatever that might mean, but I'm not interested in finding out because I don't want to use 2 hands to brush my teeth. It's just not going to happen. And that's why the user experience, that's why the experience part of the product is so important too. So solving users' problems, a product manager typically needs to see and feel the problem from the user's perspective, and that's part of solving the right problem. If this were a prototype and there were a researcher or a product manager following me through my morning routine, they would find that this feature is unnecessary. If I were their target audience. So in solving user problems, this to me is the simplest way to boil down how to think about products or how to think about the why behind products. It's very simple. Blank needs to blank because blank. So who is your user? And what are they trying to accomplish? And why are they trying to accomplish it? And if you can answer that about your product, then you have something viable, or you have a plan at least to test out. If you can't answer those questions, then there's a problem because you don't know what you're doing or why or for whom. Those three things, they're very simple, but so many things are started without consideration of them. For example, like for the MSPM program, I have user statements that are in this format because I want it to be very clear why my program exists, who it's for, and what need it will serve to them. So with that in mind, that's kind of a nice primer for the mindset. The second activity, I'll give everyone a couple minutes, but the second activity is basically think about one of the products that we mentioned earlier, maybe narrow it to a communication product or something along those lines. Think about something you use and how you might improve it. And we can share optionally, but think about something that you use frequently and think about an improved, like, have you run into a situation where you wish it had an additional functionality? Or is there something frustrating about, I won't even mention Canvas, but is there something frustrating about performing a task? Like when I do this in class, a lot of students choose Canvas because there are basic tasks that require 10 different clicks and moving in and out and all these things. But think about a product that is on your mind. It may be a favorite, it may be a least favorite. Think about an improvement, like a functional improvement that you believe would make your life better, but probably many other people's. And you might want to think about it in terms of like, who is this for? What will it help them do? And why do they need to do that? So just take a few minutes online and in person, and we'll kind of go through this. And if there are any questions in the meantime, feel free. And for what it's worth, this is actually the foundation of the project in our master's class. So you have about another minute.
I have a question, maybe for conversation later. For those of us in the room, do we know for our current project who the end user is, who's funding it, and why? Do we know that? Do we have insight into that? So we're working on our code, we're working on other things, but at the end of it, maybe we can have a conversation on, do you know who's funding, why they're funding, and why they brought us that problem, or did we speak it out? I'm wondering.
If I could add to that's, I don't know if I cover it enough in these slides, but the idea of where's the monetization, where's the money coming from is an easy to overlook one. Those of us that are old enough to remember the earlier days of Facebook, like everyone was using it, but they weren't bringing in any money till they figured out the ad structure. So it was always sort of speculative whether they would thrive or not. And it's easy to design something even that's useful, but nobody can pay for it, especially like in complicated scenarios like healthcare, where the payment structure is all twisted and everything. So does anyone want to share what your thought was? Okay.
What I would do is if I was the tutor, I would have the technology and then I would try to pair up with some form of dental healthcare coverage and then have it so that the users have some form of incentive on maybe
Ooh.
deductible costs. If they have a certain level, it's like, let's say this is brush their teeth 3 times a day. So then they're statistically proven to have lower rates of dental problems.
Yeah.
Same thing car insurances do, is like you're in a certain demographic, I would do that, but with this refresh, you're more likely to use it. And
I was just thinking the same thing. My insurance company tracks my driving and they set rates based on that. That's solving a real problem, and it's creating value for multiple people. And you could have income and revenue from both the healthcare side and the user side. And that's excellent.
I was thinking something in one of the softwares I use is called SketchUp. And whenever you click on, it's for like, mostly for like modeling, like building, stuff like
Yeah.
that. Whenever you click on like the orbiting tool, it says, it has like this bar at the bottom. And it's like, if you hold shift, then it does this. If you hold control, it does that. And I just think of like, I've sent multiple messages, like if you have like the communication apps, like this one, if you want to do next line, you do shift enter, the other one's like command enter. If you do shift enter, sometimes it sends like some sort of like bar that could be on the bottom of like some sort of help bar to kind of guide you in like the different commands you can use so that you're not like sending messages you don't need to, or you can like that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that's part of why the interface design is important too.
I'm a pretty gym. I'm a gym guy, right? And my friends come to me and train them. And I usually they say that like what information on the internet is too daunting. I feel like just an aggregation or like a means to like, I guess, skim to remove like or to focus up on like what their goal is, as opposed to just having to like waste a lot of time figuring out what they want to do as an idea.
Yeah, and that's kind of a problem that you've identified that isn't necessarily related to an existing tech necessarily or an existing product, but it's solving a user problem that you might then integrate with existing tech as well. Like if MyFitnessPal or something had that type of a module, which was like maybe strength program or hypertrophy program or whatever it might be, like you could then begin to blend it into the way that people live their lives seamlessly.
I want to fix the laser cutter. So at the makerspace that I work at, so many people don't clean the lens that it cracks way too often. And then we have to get a new lens, and it's expensive. So just putting like a cleaning pad where it just moves over, wipes itself off, and comes back like in the homing position.
Yeah.
It solves a lot of problems, both when I have to change it and when somebody else has to.
I like that we have actually an ISO drawing to go with. Bonus points for that. Keep those ideas in mind because we'll come back to them throughout the remainder of the presentation. And am I correct? I have till 12:30?
At 12:15.
12:15. Okay, we can do that. We'll go slightly high speed. So we've identified a problem. Before moving forward and prioritizing it, saying that this problem is the one that we need to work on first, we need to understand, is there a market for it? Like, on one hand, it's like, is this problem just a problem for me, or is it a problem for everyone in the US, or is it a problem for everyone on the globe? Those things will dramatically affect how you approach solving this problem. And it's another one of those things that is often overlooked or often misunderstood. Part of the reason it can be misunderstood is sometimes it's guesswork. Sometimes it is, you can't know exactly how many users you might have. And like an example that I sort of prepared, and this is, I'll skip forward to the example, but the example is like, if we were to sit here and estimate 2 years from now, what is the size of the market for remote workers in the US? Like, how would you go about, like, just as a mental exercise, think about how you might estimate the number of remote workers in the US in 2 years. For the sake of time, we'll skip we won't put anyone on the spot or ask you to walk through it, but you can think like, okay, there need to be trends, or people, I need to guess a little bit or do some research into, are people moving back to the office, or are they staying put? Are they actually moving away from the office? How many people are in the US to begin with? How many people have office jobs? All these different factors that if you were designing a product, whatever that product might be, for that market, how are you going to go about even assessing whether it's viable or not, or whether it's the target that you should be aiming for? And that's part of what we call product market fit. And this illustration just basically says, like, at the foundation of your plans is the targeted customer and the size of that market, their unmet needs. And then, like, that leads to, okay, we know there's value out there to be had. Now let's start solving it. We understand the problem. Let's start solving it. And understanding the problem first and focusing on understanding the problem first is the most important aspect. And we'll get into that next. Does this make sense? And then these are some sort of some guru quotes on the idea of product market fit. It's the only thing that matters. Like, if you don't have a market for what you're working on, then it's not worth your time, and you should be working on something else. And as it relates to, like, in a real world sense, today, like right now, I'm sure that Google has thousands of ideas that can make them millions of dollars, like, immediately. But those aren't even the high priority ones. Like, that's how many ideas and how many opportunities they have. And they only have so many resources. So they have to chase those that are really high in priority. So we're moving into the design process a bit. And this is one, again, it's another one of those quotes that I consider to be very important in how to think. This is Einstein, and he says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. Back to the idea of why, back to the idea of solving the right problem. The design process. So this one, I'll sort of give hopefully this isn't confusing, and if it is, please stop me. The design process, or at least the model that I like to use in describing the design process, is what's called double diamond, and you can see obviously why. So this double diamond process, when you thought of the problem that exists in our last activity, and you each identified something that could be improved, we're just at the hypothesis stage here at the beginning. Like, you know that something bothers you, you have a hunch that it might be viable, it might be solvable. Now it's time so as we go through the process, the diamond opens up, it diverges on purpose, because you have a hypothesis as to what your problem might be, but you need to verify it. You need to research the problem itself. You need to understand, are other users, are different types of users having the same problem? Are people encountering this? Is it viable, or is it a Bluetooth toothbrush? So, like, would people actually use this thing? Is it valuable? Am I aiming in the right direction, or is there some other problem that I stumbled upon along the way? You can do this through, well, we'll get into how you do this. Then once you have a solid understanding of the symptoms, the users, the process associated with the problem, you start to define it so that you can zero in and ensure that you have it articulated correctly, you have the users understood well. And from that point, so that's the convergence here. And then you start developing, you start, in these slides, I call it design, but you start developing solutions, you start sketching ideas, you start looking at what the solution might be, what our options are, making prototypes, those types of things. Because you don't want to start, most people, most engineers, most organizations jump straight to this section of the diamond. Some jump straight to deliver. They think, well, I see a problem, I know how to solve it. But that can be mistaken. Very often it can be mistaken. It leads to a less than optimal solution. Most people just in general, they want to be the one that finds the solution, not find the problem. That's where the glory is, right? But in reality, you want to understand the problem before moving forward to a solution, because once you have that foundation built, the solution becomes that much easier, and you're working on the right thing and working on actually creating value. And then delivery, once you have your design well understood, now you refine it, you test it, and you take it to market. So that's the general process that we'll kind of walk through here. And you can see how it takes different modes of thinking. It takes the breadth of divergent thinking. There are no bad ideas, these types of mindsets. And then it takes the precision of narrowing down and making sense of the data that you've collected. So, and then similar to the way that the other slide was arranged, there's a problem space and a solution space on the left and right of the screen. And as you find more information, as you discover things, as you learn from your prototypes, you iterate, you go back and challenge your own assumptions. This is one of my favorite. My background is, I was a mechanical engineer. I started in the auto industry at Toyota. Fujio Cho is one of their former presidents, and this is his statement on problem solving. Go see, ask why, show respect. This is empathy for your customer. This is empathy for your user. This is understanding if you have a user that doesn't like a feature you've designed, this is going to interact with them, interview them, ask them why they don't like it, or why it causes them pain, or why the maintenance on a laser cutter is a hassle, like these, or why can't you just use the existing app for the workout program? This is like it specific. I'll go on a quick aside. At Toyota specifically, like engineers that don't have dirty hands are considered to be ineffective. Those they call desk engineers, like they use that as like a negative term, because if there's a problem, you should be at the site of the problem as close as possible to understanding why the problem exists. Like in my case with the toothbrush, if there were a researcher, a design engineer, a PM, if they were following my morning routine, they would see that I had no interest in this feature. They added an expensive feature that I didn't pay for because I got it on sale, but I would not have paid full price for. So the discovery process, your goals are to collect data, to empathize, to observe. And you want to be humble and inquisitive. You don't want to assume you know the answer. That's the biggest mistake, that arrogance becomes a problem in problem solving. Several techniques, and I mean, there's a lot of techniques that for the sake of this, I won't dive into, but for as an activity, I'm going to ask you to think about the problem that you each suggested you would solve with your products, and just sketch the workflow as it exists with the problem. Like in the case of the insurance and the toothbrush thing, like they're two completely separate processes, and they don't join, which is a problem in and of itself. In the case of the gym situation, you might sketch somebody sitting at home researching and then going in and finding unsatisfactory results, researching. Like there's a loop of confusion and iteration and sort of lack of progress. But like think about your user, and you may be the user, and just think about the number of steps that they go through. Draw it in a flow, sketch it up in a flow chart. Think about the steps that they go through. that causes that pain, or that provides the opportunity for improvement. Oh, and here's kind of an example of how to make a playlist on Spotify, specifically iOS. Like yours doesn't need to be this elaborate, but this is way more elaborate. But even the point being made is like, even thinking about something as simple as making a playlist has all these steps. Like, I don't like making playlists on Spotify. If they could make that simpler, that means I'm way more likely to use it way more frequently. I'll give you another minute or two because this activity will sort of lead into the next one. Okay, I'm going to move on. You can keep sketching. I won't be offended if you're, I understand, getting immersed into these things. The part of the point of this was to understand, and like this is a great illustration, that when you break things down into their elements, into their tasks to accomplish a specific goal, it can get very complicated. It can get more complicated than we realize, and understanding that your user doesn't want to deal with the hassle, or they want a solution that streamlines it or makes it enjoyable along the way. Like maybe going back to the Disney example, maybe there's, I know that they got rid of Fast Pass, but maybe there's no way to get around the pain of standing in line, but to make it like they have the TV monitors in line and all these things that make it less painful, at least. Because they look at the steps, they look at the elements of the experience overall. Defining the problem. So one thing that, as we sort of explore the problems that you've all stated, is it's important to consider that you're not the user necessarily, and your opinion, your bias, your thought process on the problem is just a hypothesis until you verify it with this broader user base. Like, is everybody running into the same gym research problem? Is everybody running into the maintenance problem, or are there easy workarounds to solve it in ways that, you know, is just a thing that, or maybe they don't mind it at all, or maybe it's not a big enough issue for the rest of the user group, or for most of the user group. This is kind of like an HCII mantra too. An example of that is, this is a graph of strength of computer users by country, I think in 2016. And it's easy, especially at CMU, it's easy to look at the world as being completely populated by power, you know, top level computer users. Like, everybody here is at least literate, and most are what you would consider top tier in terms of skill, but that's not the case. That's not the case if you go to a factory or if you go to a restaurant. Like, those people don't rely on computer usage and competence and tech for their daily lives. They don't have as much use for it. Or if you were to go to a retirement home, like, you could break this down by age, you could break this down by different ways. It's critical to know this in understanding who your users are, because they don't think like you, they don't have your set of skills. And if we go back to the idea of, like, in 2 years, how many people will be working remotely, then it's very easy if all of my coworkers have office jobs and all of them work at a university where it's kind of critical to be on site. I'd look around and say, well, most people have office jobs, but most of them need to come in anyway. But I would be wrong, because I'm just looking at the world around me. I'm looking at people that are like me, when in reality, there are people that are doing vastly different things and vastly different types of work. So in the process of designing, in the process of making sense of the data that you've collected during your interviews, during your surveys, during your research, you want to interpret and synthesize it, and you want to, again, bring this convergent line of thinking. After you've considered all the ideas and all the aspects of the problem, you want to really zero in on what it is and define it properly. So we've established the problem space, and moving into the solution space, into the next divergent area is development. I have it labeled as design in the slides. I like this quote because especially in technical fields, people think that their first solution is the correct solution. That's not what you want to do in this case. You want to consider all possible options. You want to consider options that sound crazy. You want to combine ideas. You want to think about the way that other people have solved similar problems. You want to assume that your idea might be off target and what other ideas might exist. And there are plenty of tactics to do this. Like I'll share again, this is one of those areas that I needed to expand for myself, because as an engineer, I would look at a problem and say, yeah, I know how to solve this thing. I understand it, no problem. This has to be the way to look at it. But maybe there are factors I didn't consider. Maybe, based on the last chart, maybe I'm designing a highly technical solution when my users are not technically skilled. It's like one of those things, you want to consider all the universe of possibilities before zeroing in on the solution that you're going to run with. One way that this is done is prototyping. This is an example. Hopefully I'm not the only one old enough in the room to remember Palm Pilots, but this is the prototype of understanding, and you can apply it to the toothbrush thing as well. This was done with a chopstick and a block of wood before the Palm Pilot was released, during its development. Like, will people carry a device around in their pocket? Like, will it be too clumsy? Will I use it on a regular basis? I mean, it's the same thing for this. It's like the functionality and the interface are one aspect of the design, but will it fit into your life? Will you carry it with you? Will you use it on a regular basis? And will it be popular with your users? And this was literally done using a mock-up with a chopstick and a piece of wood. So it doesn't need to be elaborate. And they evolve into more elaborate prototypes once you've proven an idea. So for this one, sketch, well, maybe for the sake of time, I'll just ask everybody, like, consider how, in fact, I'll leave this maybe for you to come back to if you're interested in, or I'll stick around afterwards. Consider your improved workflow for the problem that you're solving. Consider how that would compare. Like, can you identify the pain point on your previous sketch, on your flowchart sketch? Can you find exactly where in the process you can streamline it? Or is it a completely new process because the old one was so broken? Also, think about sketching an interface for like how would your controls look for this new process. This again is the basis of the class that I taught. But for the sake of time, I won't pause and ask you to do that right now. Maybe if we have time at the end. But here's an example of both the flow and the interface of Target. And this is a customer trying to find a Nintendo Switch. And what Target realized was they have sections for electronics and they have sections for video games. And if they only had one path to accomplish that goal, whoever chose this would get frustrated if it was really under electronics, and vice versa. So what they did was they designed their process in such a way that both pathways take you to the same destination. And they're both valid at the same time. And they made the interface clean and easy to follow. Here's another example of just like in designing, this is kind of what the activity that we're skipping over, but in designing an interface, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be, you can run prototypes and test it with people with just pen and paper. And then there are also applications like if you're curious to play around with it, the most popular one, or I think the most popular one is called Figma. That prototype on the right-hand side was one of my students' projects in 2019. And what he did was he added a social function to Apple Health. I think that's what it's called. But so this allows you to sort of make those prototypes that actually have click-through screens. And it's surprisingly easy to make a pretty good prototype that provides valid testing for you. So the design process, now we're delivering. Steve Jobs, of course, design is not just what it looks and feels like, it's how it works. And that's the deliver phase. We want to test everything out. We want to make sure that it's functional as intended. We want to make sure that that if there are adjustments to be made, we make them through iteration and challenge assumptions. And as we learn more, make the changes that are critical before launch. This I won't play for time's sake, but it's pretty fun. It's in the slides. It's pretty funny. There was a situation in this speaks to solving the wrong problem. This is in California. Somebody thought it would be better to design stoplights with 2 red lights and 1 yellow light and no green light. And the whole news story here that I have a link to is about how it totally confused all the drivers, because we expect the world to work in a certain way. I expect when I press the down button on this laptop, I expect it to move to the next slide. We just, if there's a door handle like this, I expect to push, not to pull. It's just the way that things are designed in such a way that we expect them to work. And testing will help you understand that. It's a shame I have to skip over that, but so all this said, the 2 questions that are more open for discussion than anything, but we've covered it pretty well in depth. I want to ask this as a question. What I'll say is, I was going to put this to the audience so that we could discuss it, but what types of experience are most important for product managers? It's pretty much anything that was on the team slide that I showed earlier. Like when I showed all those teams that interact, there's not a wrong process. It helps to be technical. It helps to understand your field. But it's really critical that you can solve problems and you can communicate with people. The people in this room, the engineers and developers, like that's an excellent starting point, especially for digital products. And again, like it moves back to, so what kinds of skills are important? We've gone over this to some extent, but a little bit of everything. Maybe the ultimate is the flexibility to learn what you don't start out knowing. Like when we talked about, do I need to do all these things? Yeah, sort of, but the ability to learn to do and to adapt and to like say, okay, you're telling me something technical, I don't understand it. so I'm going to ask follow-up questions, or I'm going to try to put it in simple terms so that I can take it to this other team and explain the ramifications. Those skills are most important. So if you're a very like there is one right answer, very sort of like narrowly focused, super analytical person, product management might not be for you. If you don't like pressure, if you don't like time pressure, product management might not be for you. If you don't like interacting with people, especially customers that might give you critical feedback, product management might not be for you. If you like those things, because that's how I find the problems, and that's like I'm really interested in not just sitting at a cubicle and doing the same thing day in and day out, but getting into the mix in everything, which is where my head has always been, even in my early engineering days. I was always like, why am I even working on this? This other thing drives these other things, and they're what is important. Then it might be for you. All that said, any questions, any feedback, any takeaways, especially, because that'll help anchor things and that'll help me know what worked.
Being the director of the MS program, right, and I'm assuming you get a lot of applicants. What specific you look for?
Well, it's kind of those things that we discussed, where somebody that is, in fact, our application process, our interview process, it's designed to think, can you be presented with an ambiguous problem, something that isn't clearly defined, and can you think your way through? Like a similar type of question would be okay, so tell me about how you would estimate the remote workers in 2 years. And it wouldn't be about, do you know the answer? Nobody knows the answer. It would be about, can you consider the factors? Can you consider who's affected? Can you consider why that question is important and work through it in a logical sense? And then on top of, like, this isn't really a secret. One of the things that a lot of the questions that I've worked into the application process have an ethical component. So, like, one of the things we talked about, the insurance apps that track users. Like, is it ethical for me as a PM at the insurance company to take that data and sell it to the government? Like, okay, is that a good idea or is it a bad idea? Because there is no right answer. So how are you going to think through that as a problem? Any other aha moments or any other things that need clarification?
Hey, Brad.
Yeah.
It's Arun.
Hey.
Hey. So one thing I just want to sort of like maybe add some color to maybe these last couple slides. People talk about PM skills a lot. And I think Brad's one of the very few people I've met that's actually good at everything. Like that's presented. And so, like, I think that I would say that the more common case generally is that PMs, like, they're kind of good at most of this, but there's one or two areas that they tend to excel in. So if you see just one thing that Brad is sort of taking you through here that is interesting to you, that's all it kind of takes to potentially be interested in a career in product. You don't have to say, like, okay, I need to be an expert in strategy. I need to be an expert in soft skill negotiation. I need to be amazing at market sizing. And I need to be technical, and I need to be super analytical. Like, all those skills generally do not exist in one person unless your name is Brad Eiben. And so what I would sort of encourage people to do is just think, like, if you're kind of interested, if you're deeply interested in even just one area here, it's worth exploring. And the other thing too is many of you will opt into engineering. And I'll tell you this now, running my own company and even having worked at multiple startups and multiple companies that all of you would know, the most valuable engineers are the ones that actually have some element of product sense, because they help the team converge faster to technical solutions that are actually like valid and usable by people. And so I would say that, you know, in the skill bin, you saw a lot of stuff today. And you know, you don't necessarily have to be an expert at all of it. The second thing I want to say is Brad had a slide as to what paths, what experiences are most valuable for product managers. And I can just give you the answer to that right now. I have never actually seen a clear path to being a PM. I've worked at many companies. One of the best PMs I ever worked with was a high school dropout. And so, you know, I've seen, you know, and so the person was just incredibly street smart, had a really great sense for what users wanted, and was, you know, was extremely like self-taught. And so, like, you know, I would say this, like, there may be some of you who say, like, you may look at past experience and say it doesn't line up. You may say, you know, maybe I don't think I'd fit in. You may even go start looking on LinkedIn and start looking at the resumes of students and saying, I don't really line up there. I probably wouldn't be competitive. I wouldn't think that way. And I wouldn't think that way in terms of applying. And I certainly wouldn't think that way in terms of it as a career path. I've met PMs from just about every walk of life who have done well, legitimately. So, you know, keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. And maybe I didn't explain it clearly enough. Like all those teams that you work with and being able to speak their languages, like it doesn't mean that you need to be a marketing expert and a design expert, and you're just bringing their expertise together into the same stew. Thanks, Arun.
Building off of that, for many that are going to watch this presentation, this might be completely new to them, the idea of product management, the idea of product development. And we talked about wanting to explore, like what if they want to explore? Are there specific resources that, you know, there's like a couple of like, these are great kickoff points, right?
I was going to include a section on that. The trick is there are so many resources. There's a library, there's a genre unto itself of product management books. And like any leadership book is a good product management book. Any psychology book is a good product management book. Any tech book is a good product management book. So to say that there's a central or even several central sources of information. Arun has a podcast where they talk about tech issues and product management. So
do you have a core reading list for your master's students? Because I know there's always like a few seminal books, whether they're directly on product management, you're like, these are 5, you know, or something like that.
The problem with that is that even our students, even coming through the same program, they have diverging interests. Some are more interested in the customer side and maybe like the retail e-commerce side. Some are more interested in finance. And there's such a sea of things that could be read in resources. Plus, the program is not easy. So they're spending pretty much all their time, 24 hours a day in product management anyway. So there's not it's something that's been considered over.
And dive in, and those things like Drucker, lean
management,
those things, the topics that are coming up, and dive into those.
What I will say on that topic though is when students come to me, there are 2 things that I talk with them most frequently about, and I think this is important for the general audience too. Like this design process, this design thinking structure that I just walked through, that's like half of all of our conversations, more than half, a lot more than half of all of our conversations move to that design, and do we understand the problem? So that's one aspect. So anything that helps with understanding, with exploring problems, that's one area where a lot of my real world coaching discussions move. Another is, and I'll sort of use this by name. Another area is there's a book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, and it's about persuasion psychology. There's so much because there's so much human interaction with product managers. How do you persuade your boss? How do you persuade your team member? How do you understand How do you persuade your user to adopt a new feature? Like the majority of conversations involve some aspect of both of those. And then the rest normally involve one or the other, because the problem solving thought process and the persuasion process are two of those things that are at the core of almost any problem to be solved.
Just a statement, like one thing that like I had kind of had an issue with like was like persuasion and like influence. And for some reason I thought it had like a negative connotation to it. But what I'm starting to see now is that persuasion and influence is never.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Just and then one of like Rachel's question. Understanding like knowing that there's a lot of information out there, right? So what would you say is like a blatant like no, like that's like popular?
Oh, so sort of like bad advice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's is this still recorded? Well, I don't know that I have a direct answer for that, but what I will say is something about like if you drew personality traits on a Venn diagram and had like people that want to be influencers and people that want to be PMs, they're almost like overlap. So there's just, that's one of the reasons there's such a high volume of advice, is because people that have PM mindsets also like to do things like blog and also like to make YouTube series. So there's a ton of it. Because there's a ton of it, you'll find people that debate unimportant points. Like they'll take that Venn diagram that I showed early in the program or early in the session, and they'll make their own because that one's not right enough for me. And like it's unimportant in the end. Like it's like they'll bicker over like this is the right way to design. You know, you need to conduct. There's some science to how many interviews to conduct, but like this interface design is better than that because blah blah blah. And no, this one's better because blah blah blah. Well, those are testable, and it's like even though half of what I've preached here is don't put your own bias into the solution, they still do it. And some of that is because they want to be the top dog influencer.
Brad?
Yeah, Arun, go ahead.
Yeah, on the resource question, I agree. Like the problem is, it's like I said before, there is no background and there is no singular path to being a PM. So it's very hard in some ways to pin down resources that would be helpful for any given person, right? It's because, you know, if you come from a really strong design lens, very hard to, you know, say like, you know, I come from a much more technical, analytical sort of angle. So like, it's hard for me to tell people kind of what they should be doing, right? But I will say this, there are a couple books that I think are very good. One is actually the book that many people have when they're interviewing for PM jobs. It's called Cracking the PM Interview. It does a really good job of talking about PM skills, talking about what's expected, talking about the role at like major companies, things like that. Gail Lockman Dowell, who wrote the book, I don't think she intended this to be like this enduring product resource for like, you know, for all the other questions beyond interviewing, but I would certainly recommend that people read that book. And maybe even if you don't go through all the interview questions, if you just want to know more about the role and like how to kind of go about it, it does a pretty good job. The other book is one that was written by a friend of mine. It's called Build What Matters by Ben Foster, who is the chief product officer at Whoop. Some of you may know that company. It's a sports wearable company. And so I would say that between those two books, you can probably get a pretty good idea. And I would say that those are probably the two that I probably recommend the most to people. You know, they're not going to tell you everything you need to know, but they're probably the closest thing to seminal texts in our space that we have in today's world.
Thanks, Ryan.
Earlier, it just announced online that we'll be wrapping up in 2 minutes. So this is the last.
Okay.
Earlier, you mentioned, like a lot of upward mobility. Do you see that more in a linear fashion, like they come in, lower in the company and keep progressing up, or like jump around companies? Is there any sort of consistency to that?
Well, That's probably more case by case than universal, but PM almost by definition is not an entry level role. So not always, nothing is always, but in general, companies don't hire for product manager until you've shown a work experience of X number of years in a field, and then you show the aptitude for this broader thinking as well. That's not always the case because a lot of the bigger companies have what they call associate product management programs, and you can hire in at entry level, and it's more of an apprenticeship than anything else. But that's kind of rare and very competitive. So for those that get their PM job, they might have been working as an engineer for 5 years, and now they're moving into product management. They move around a lot because they're in demand. I would say probably more often than not, they sort of slash back and forth in a way that they stay somewhere 2-3 years, get a set of accomplishments, move to the next place 2-3 years, get a set of accomplishments. Lots of them are entrepreneurial, and they'll start a role to build a significant career and a foundation. And then once they've had enough of that, they will start their own business. There's no recipe, just like Arun said, that there's no recipe for backgrounds to get into product management. There's no recipe per se of how to advance, but the skill set that you develop, the skill set that you practice on a day-to-day basis is broad thinking, and it's what is necessary for executive roles. Good question. This was fun. This was worth it. I appreciate the questions. Thank you all.